Universal design, one step at a time. So often when people think of universal access, they think of physical access to buildings. They often do not think about how students can access the actual content of a course. With more instructors and instructional designers creating content, especially online, it's important that this content is accessible to all. And this project will examine ways for designers and instructors to develop coursework that meets the requirements of Universal Design and Learning, or UDL, so everyone has an equal chance to succeed. So this project, this overview is basically 4 parts. We're going to go over some background on Universal Design and Learning. We're going to look at incorporating UDL one step at a time, recognizing it's a process, not a product. We're going to look at incorporating feedback from current students as a means for continuing to improve the design. And we're going to look at incorporating cultural elements so that English language learners have a better chance for succeeding. So looking at Universal Design and Learning, if you look at the text on the right, it's very blurry. And we probably wouldn't put this on a handout or on a web page because people wouldn't be able to understand it. Blurry text like this creates a barrier to learning. And when we don't provide appropriate accommodations for users, we create barriers like this. And what Universal Design and Learning says is that the goal of UDL is to reduce barriers to instruction, to provide appropriate accommodations, supports, and challenges for all students, including those with disabilities and including those with limited English language skills. Looking at the background of UDL, it really has its roots in the Rehabilitation Act of 1973 and the Americans with Disabilities Act of 1990s. And basically, these acts stated that universities and colleges in the United States are legally responsible for providing reasonable accommodations for people with disabilities who are qualified for their programs and services. So these accommodations included things like providing print text in alternate formats like Braille, providing extra time for testing, providing a sign language interpreter in class, moving the class to a more accessible room for a disabled student, or providing the script of a video for hearing impaired. The Higher Education Opportunity Act of 2008 included the concept of instructional design and learning, and the goal of the act was to make instruction more accessible to everyone, accommodating for physical disabilities, learning disabilities, and English language learners. And the thing is, the accommodations cover both the instructional content, but also how students turned work in, the types of assignments, so that we start providing options for students so that they have a best chance of being successful in the course. The purpose of this project and this presentation was to show faculty that they can update their current materials one step at a time, ensuring the work is high quality and compliant with UDL requirements by adopting some of the following simple practices. So 3 ways to be UDL compliant. Focus on process, not product. Obtain feedback from current users and include multicultural elements. So looking at the first part, it's a process, not a product. Dr. Rebecca Corey wrote, "A designer has to imagine the greatest diversity of students possible and design for them. Then, when someone enrolls in the class who is outside the designer's imagination, the designer expands her imagination and incorporates that person too." So the goal is to try to think of the greatest diverse population and create coursework or training materials with that group of people in mind, but recognizing that this is an inclusive process and we will continue to adapt these materials as new students who arrive who we hadn't thought of. So we're looking at multiple races, multiple cultures, as well as multiple disabilities when we design. And so these numbers show us the need for UDL. However, in the article, Universal Design of Online Classes, Corey points out that UDL is an ongoing process, and we continue to adjust these materials as students arrive. Another way to incorporate UDL is by getting feedback from current users. Ask our students, did you have trouble understanding this? Were you able to access this? I used actually a personal example here. I had some blind students in my classes this past year. I had taken materials that I had created that were graphic by nature and turned them into PDF files. And what I found out after discussing materials was that students still had some problem using screen readers with PDF files. Word documents worked much better. And so all I had to do was go in and convert the PDF documents to Word documents, and it made it that much easier for my visually impaired students to access these materials. So that's just one example. But we also need to make sure that if we have videos online and we have a hearing impaired student, that student gets a copy of the script so that they understand what's going on in the video. Finally, include multicultural elements. Now, a way to increase accessibility for English language learners is to incorporate multicultural stories and references. And this helps ELL students connect what is comfortable and familiar with the new language and culture. It also provides an opportunity for sharing that information and their stories. Dr. Kavita Roa provided multiple examples of teachers who used children's stories or folk tales for the ELL students. They would use these stories and they would explain them in English. They would sometimes create things like graphic novels of the stories, incorporate pictures, as well as their language and a translation. But they would create a multimedia presentation that incorporated both language and cultures. But they had to be able to speak and use and read English as a part of this. And it actually enabled these students to learn these English language skills much more quickly. So in conclusion, by focusing on the ongoing process, obtaining feedback from current students, and including multicultural elements, faculty, instructors, and instructional designers can be prepared for the majority of students who enroll. It does not need to be an overwhelming process or perfect the first time. We just need to keep the greatest variety of students in mind and design for them. And as new students arrive that we didn't think of, we just make the necessary changes to include them as well. Thank you.